You cannot run an effective volleyball team, for example, without a lot of talk before the game about the strategies and tactics you're going to use, or maybe even try for the first time. And you definitely can't win a game with silence on the court during the game itself. Sex is the same. The more we adopt the perspective, the more it can be easier to quote unquote win the game. Welcome to the Sex After Kids podcast, a place for parents to come and learn together about the sometimes bumpy road back into the saddle of their sex life after adoption, childbirth, or joining a blended family. I am your host, Sofia Ashley, certified sex educator and sex coach, mother and stepmother, and your totally TMI guide to becoming BFFs with your body and initiating easy, connected, and confident, naked, sexy fun times. Here we are, one part science of sex, one part mindfulness magic, and one part straight up real talk to help you find the spark in your relationship and yourself after kids. I am so glad you are here. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sex After Kids podcast. I'm excited for today's episode. I'm giving you a little sneak peek behind the Sex After Kids Summit doors so that you can hear one of the sessions. It's one of mine, it's from day 2, and it's all about communicating about your sex life, the big old elephant in the room. So many of you that I talk to are really stuck in silence around this topic. So either, you both know it's an issue, but you don't know how to broach it, or you are talking about it, but in very unproductive ways. Defensiveness can come up, egos can show up, all kinds of things. This is sensitive stuff. It's vulnerable stuff. And if we don't know how to bring it up in the right ways, the conversation can just become a disaster and we give up and never want to talk about it again. So my goal with this episode is to help give you a starting point, regardless of where you are at, to find a way into this conversation with your partner. And I'll add one caveat or one new step. So for the episode, I kind of really dive into how to talk about your sex life in particular. Although there are some tools for how to broach this topic from a bit more of a distance if that is feeling challenging. But I would say if the tips in the episode still feel like not the right starting point for you, then what I invite you to consider is to follow the same approach, the same steps that I talk about, but to talk about your relationship instead. And what I mean by that is sometimes, especially if we have a partner who's really disconnected from their sexuality right now because of trauma and lots of buildup and negativity since kids, and so they just are not even sure that the sexual part of your relationship matters to them anymore. Or if you have a partner who is drowning at work and just their priorities on the computer every night and they're forgetting to make you and the kids a priority, then sometimes we need to start back even a step further, which is to say hey, can we both acknowledge, let's just talk about the relationship that we have right now today and how it's feeling? And can we put on the table, what we'd like to feel? And an example of that could be hey, yeah, we've been married for 8 years. Things feel good. I love you and all that fun stuff. But I guess I thought that there'd still be some flirt, there'd still be some fun, there'd still be some tease, there'd still be some surprise in our relationship. And to share from a really vulnerable place of what your wishes are for the relationship. Because if you can both get on board for a common vision of what it is that you're working towards, and again, like I share in the episode, maybe that vision is 5 years from now. If you're in the nitty gritty and your kids are, sucking all the energy out of the room as they might be, to be okay, We know there's not a lot of effort to get to this vision right now today, but can we hold in our hearts the vision that we do want to have? I want to be the couple that's making out in the bathroom every once in a while. I want to be the couple that feels like a team. I want to be the couple that's flirting in the kitchen in front of the kids. I want to be the couple that snuggles up every Friday night and has a really deep connected convo. And one of the ways you can do this is to think about a heyday moment in your relationship when things felt really, really great, and to talk about maybe some of the things that you miss from that era or some of the things that you appreciated from that era, and to try to get creative about what you can bring back. So listen to this episode with this in mind. And if the episodes just feel like a bit further than where you're at right now, then take the same approach, but just talk about your relationship instead. And just a reminder, we can't change what we can't talk about. Things are not going to get better. They're not going to change. They're not going to shift if we don't brave and fight for and argue for in a good way, like advocate for the relationship that we want to have. One that feels alive, one that feels vibrant, one that feels connected. We all have a right to that. We all deserve that. Our children deserve parents who are in that relationship, who are feeling fueled by their relationship, not drained by it. And sex is a part of that relationship, whatever it looks like for you. Got questions? You can always hit me up if you need to know where the starting point is for you. And I'll just throw a note in that I'm still doing Sex After Kids Reset Roadmap calls. These are the perfect opportunity to touch base with me, to talk about where you are at and get some concrete steps to move forward, whether you need help with that first conversation or whether you need help with your next sex date. So check the link in the show notes for all the details. They're free. Get on a call with me. In 30 minutes, you'll have some practical steps to implement. All right. Without further ado, here is the workshop. I hope you enjoy. Today, we are going to talk about how to talk about your sex life. Now, this is different than giving feedback during sex. This is rather about how we talk about creating a common language and vision for the sex that we want to be having right now in this season of our relationship and into the future. So this is going big picture. If you are at this summit, then you are either arguing about your mismatched sex drives, ignoring your sex life or lack thereof, and not talking about it. Or if you're in the small minority, you're talking about it regularly, but you want to open up the conversation even more or broaden your horizons. Yay, you! Talking about your sex life, even when things in the rest of our relationship are going really well, can feel really, really, really hard, really risky, or really vulnerable. So in this mini session, we're going to break down why talking about our sex life can be so challenging, my favorite tips for getting the conversation going, and my favorite kind of approaches, as well as pointers to make it the most productive conversation it can be instead of a disruptive one. I want to note that this is a really great companion workshop to the one that Michelle Perta is offering on moving from conflict to connection, which is also today in the summit. I'm sure you can use a lot of the tips that she has shared there, paired with my tips here for the best success in having a conversation that feels connected and useful, even if there's some conflict in it. So first up, let's talk about why this is so hard, right? First of all, most of us have pretty mediocre communication skills in general. We have a hard time listening to validate. We have a hard time making our partner feel heard. We have a hard time articulating our thoughts and emotions and sharing what we need from a partner. And unless you've taken some kind of a seminar on effective communication and worked really hard on practicing these skills, There is a lot that goes into effective communication on both sides of the conversation. So if this convo feels hard, cut yourself a little bit of slack that no one probably gave you the skills to do it well. And so you're learning, and the willingness to learn is the main thing that we're looking for, the willingness to fail. The second reason that this can be so hard is that sex is surrounded by shame and taboo. We don't encourage open and honest communication about sex. It's all shrouded in mystery. You can think back when you were young. Most of us got an awkward talk from our parents and the vibe that our questions about sex and relationship were weird, wrong, or downright shameful instead of normal and healthy. Like, even if you pause right now and tune into your body, how regulated do you feel even just like showing up for this summit and listening to me have this conversation? So, because of that shame and taboo, many of us have no clue what we really want or need in bed. And if you can't name it, it's hard to talk about it, right? If we don't have the words to describe what we need, what it is that we're looking for, it's hard to get what we want. Without a common vocabulary to understand my own body and what it wants and needs, it can be really hard to express that to my partner. So this shame and taboo often just literally makes it so that we don't have the words to even have this conversation. The third reason is that talking about sex is vulnerable. It's one thing to share with your partner your preference for laundry detergent with no scent, or the fact that you don't like spicy food. It is quite another to tell someone that you want them to do certain unspeakable things to you without worrying you'll be judged or they'll look at you differently or think of you differently, right? Or without worrying that if you tell someone that something they're doing doesn't quite turn your crank, you risk shaming or hurting them. So we all, for good reason, get worried that we will be judged or worry we will really hurt our partner's feelings in the process of us judging them or sharing our own feedback. And that feels really risky and vulnerable. So we don't go there. Pause here for a minute if you'd like and just ask yourself, like, what are the biggest reasons that I have a hard time talking about this? What am I worried will happen if I bring up this conversation? What worst case scenario is my brain creating? Society has got us harsh in the vibes, but even though it feels hard, we can change it. And before we dive into some strategies, I'm going to try my best to convince you that it's worth the risk, or it's worth like what you perceive to be the risk. And like, you're already here showing up to the conversation, which is half the battle, but just if you need a little bit more motivation. Okay. So reason number one is that you cannot change what you cannot talk about. If your sex life sucks and you want it to change, no amount of willing it to change will make it so without a conversation. Sorry to break it to you. Sex is a team sport. Reason number two, you cannot run an effective volleyball team, for example, without a lot of talk before the game about the strategies and tactics you're going to use, or maybe even try for the first time. And you definitely can't win a game with silence on the court during the game itself. Sex is the same. The more we adopt the perspective, the more it can be easier to quote unquote win the game. There is nothing more disconnecting than letting the elephant in the room grow and grow and grow. Everyone knows it's there, but no one has the courage to talk about it until it explodes, right? The elephant is so much easier to deal with when it's small and manageable. We get less conflict, less explosion. Another motivator really is that communication, generally speaking, when done effectively, creates the actual connection that you're looking for. So if you think back to, this is a lesson I've had to learn over and over again, almost every hard conversation I've ever had to have, whether with a coworker, my spouse, my kids, you name it, no matter what the outcome of the conversation, no matter whether I got what I wanted or not, as a result, I always got relief, I always got understanding, and I always got connection. Maybe not like immediately after the conversation, especially if the conversation took more than one conversation, but certainly through the process of trying to understand the other person's point of view, we build a bridge, right? We're often building up a conversation in our head, imagining or assuming what the other person's going to say and how they will react. Sometimes we are right, often we are not. So get yourself out of the pain of worrying about what the conversation is going to be like and just have the damn conversation. Okay. Lastly, I think here your sex life is yours, okay? It is not what you see on TV. It is not what you think your parents' sex life was or what you think your friend's sex life is. It is yours. It is yours to create, yours to make what you want it to be. We have loaded so many assumptions about what sex is and what it should look like. And really, just getting brave and opening the conversation is a statement to your partner and to yourself that your pleasure and your sex life matters, and that you are going to take a leadership role in creating the kind of pleasure and sex that you want to see in your life and in your relationship. That you are going to make it what you want it to be together, right? It's okay if you need to say out loud to your partner, this conversation is hard for me. This conversation is awkward. And you can start by sharing even just your motivation to actually have the conversation. It does get easier the more you practice. You can pause me here for another minute to just ask yourself, why is this conversation important to me? Why do I want to have this conversation with my partner? Why is it worth showing up to this conversation? Okay, so now that we're all hyped up and feeling like, yeah, I need to have this conversation or try again if you've already made an attempt, how do we do it? First of all, this is not a one and done conversation. This is an evolving conversation that we come back to again and again and again. Think of it the same as planning for your career change or for your family, buying a family home or going on a long-term vacation. Your goals are to understand how your partner thinks about sex, what motivates them to have it, what they are curious about, and what they want to try, and what the ideal sex life looks like for them. And to answer all of those questions for yourself as well. No small feat, I know. Another don't is like, don't have this conversation in the bedroom. This is not a convo that we have during sex, although I think it's something that naturally comes about post sex, especially if you're starting to engage in like debriefing and observing what's working and what's not working. Like book a specific date night to have this conversation. Don't do it at 11 p.m. when you're both exhausted and snippy. Deliberately drop the kids off with grandma or the sitter or at the park or put them on a movie so that you have time to be alert and attentive to each other and focused on one another while you share really vulnerable things, while you have a conversation that feels risky for you both. You can also make better progress sometimes by having this conversation side by side, going for a walk, using nature to help you, or going for a drive. So those are just some quick tips on how to make this more productive. We'll talk about more at the end. All right, so how do we do this, right? My first approach is to go theoretical. That means to talk about your sex life in theory at a distance from your own sex life. And the two biggest ways to do this are to share something that you've learned on your own or to engage together in a learning journey together. So this might mean tossing your partner a TED Talk that you watched the other day, sharing a recording of one of the sessions at the summit, or it might mean agreeing to read Get Cliterate together, and having a discussion as you're learning. The main goal here is that we want to talk about sex as a concept. We want to learn about concepts and kind of digest them and explore them together without necessarily talking specifically about how they apply to our sex life. That would be kind of like phase two. This conversation feels really hard for you. Theoretical is the best way to go. You're kind of starting a little bit oblique. You're not into the weeds of who's doing what and what you like and what you don't like. You're really talking about sex in theory. And the winning part here is that you're engaging in learning something about sex that's new for you both, that's going to help you in the long run. The second piece here is to explore motivations and beliefs. So the next layer of moving into something that's more personal, but still theoretical, is to talk about what you both believe about sex, how you learned about sex, and what your motivations for sex are. So these kinds of questions look like, what motivates you to have sex, or why is sex important to you? It can be things like sharing what you remember from sex ed or sharing what you remember from the talk from your parents. It can mean talking about your most memorable and least memorable sexual experiences, whether those be with each other or just from your far and distant paths past, right? Um, so getting into a conversation about motivations and beliefs brings it a little bit more personal into your life, but it's still distant. The third piece is to talk about what you want more of. So when we keep it in the positive, we try to encourage filling the time, filling the space, filling the energy with more of what we do want. We will naturally see less of what we don't want. So this keeps us in the more positive, which can be really helpful, especially if we're not used to having these conversations and our egos flare and we get defensive. So some questions to ask here are like, what's working really well in our sex and intimate life? And like, what do I want more of? If you're not having a lot of sex right now, you could talk about what helps you to feel really connected with your partner. I really love it when you give me that massage on Friday nights while the kids watch the movie. Or I really like it when we watch that favorite show on Tuesday nights. It just really makes me feel connected to you. You could talk about what you miss about your sex life before kids, or like what you want more of from other eras. Or here's where you could speak specifically about like what were some of our most memorable sexual eras and what clues could we take from that to bring back. An example for me would be that in the early days of my relationship with my husband, I was doing my Tantra certification. And so I was happily bringing home breathing techniques, eye gazing techniques, meditation techniques, tantric hold techniques, and we were actively engaging in a lot of those. And a lot of the sex that we were having was really, really great at the time. And so that's a clue for us that as we have more time and energy, those are some tools that we can go back to because they definitely worked well for me. Two more strategies for you here. So the next one is to think about the future. And I don't mean like next week or in the next 6 months, but like what do you want your sex life to look like 10 years from now? What stage is your sexual relationship in? If you caught Dan Purcell's talk about the stages of sexual relationships, what is something you're curious to learn more about or try? Or what's something that you never want to try? Um, so this is a way of kind of like fast forwarding 10 years and thinking about like what you would like your sex life to look like then and working back to say, okay, are there elements of that that feel realistic for us right now? So like for example, maybe you're like, yeah, when the kids are out of the house, I want to have a dedicated sex room with like everything super ready to go and like an amazing sound system and dark lights and all the things that I really love. And that's not something that's very possible right now for us because we've got little people who walk into our bedroom all the time. But maybe we could have like a little sex box with some of our accoutrements, or maybe there's a couple of ways that we could design our bedroom to feel a little bit more sexy. Maybe we could paint it a darker color. Maybe we could get our desk and our like life paperwork out of there. So that's like an example of that, right? Another example for me is like I have a goal of us eventually, when money and time allow, going to a learning retreat of some kind every couple of years. I'd love for us to be investing in like communication skills retreats and couples retreats and retreats where we're going to like learn more tantric skills or learning more sexual skills together and like practicing them in an environment that's outside of our day-to-day life. So that's kind of like on my bucket list as a way for me to show how I want to continue to invest in our relationship and our bond. So you can think about that. And another example, just from my own life, I'll share here is like I have noticed that I'm in a phase where I need more new and novel things. So maintenance sex is not doing it for me right now. And while that means we can't get like insanely creative because we're still at the phase where like little people can interrupt us at any time and all that stuff, there are still ways that we can play with that, whether it's like bringing home handcuffs or trying some new lingerie or trying some of the genital massage moves on day 4. Knowing that new and novel is something that excites me is a helpful way for us to think about what we could bake into our sex life right now that's going to work. Last but not least, we have the approach of just going direct, right? Getting very direct, very specific about what you don't want anymore, or what's not working for you, or what you do need. And if this is where you're focused, Michelle Perta's tools should really help you here, because we want to avoid blame and pointing fingers and instead really try to focus on explaining to our partner what our experience is of something that they do. Right. So try to imagine that your partner is like an alien and they came and they touched you in a certain way and they have no clue how it affected you, to try to be able to explain that in a non-judgmental way, not in a way that's like, you hurt me, you did that on purpose, but hey, you alien who doesn't know my body, did you realize that when this happens, it feels like this, right? And I think the biggest reminder or cue or encouragement I want to give you here is like pretending that things are a-okay when they're not is really a form of cruel kindness, okay? Like your partner is a person you love and they love you. They do have a desire to please you. And if they're doing what they think is the best they can with no feedback that the strategies they're using are not effective, they're driving blind. And that's just not fair. So maybe you've been pretending for a little while, or maybe you've been pretending for a long while, but it's never too late to just kind of hit the reset button. And Sex After Kids is like this perfect opportunity to be like, hey, all that stuff that we thought was working or did work for me at one point, like doesn't anymore. And I need you to engage in a journey with me to like reinvent this together. And here's a couple of starting points. So just remember that when you're keeping your pain to yourself, you usually do that in the name of not wanting to hurt the other person. But typically, what's actually happening is that you don't want to deal with the discomfort of bringing it up. And so instead, you are hurting that person by not giving them the opportunity to change and improve and give you what you need and understand better. And you're allowing them to drive blind, which can be really painful, right? We want to embrace the awkward, we want to say it out loud, and we just want to find a way to broach these conversations. So those are a couple different approaches you can take, right? Going from theoretical, which is very distant from our own sex life, to exploring our motivations and beliefs, which is a little bit more direct, but still pretty theoretical, to talking about what we want more of and keeping it in the positive realm, to getting very specific and just straight up and direct about what it is that we need. And what I'll say here is I don't really have a formula for like what the outcome of these conversations is. What I will say is that a lot of people get fixated on frequency, so how often we're having sex. And two things I'll say is like, as you're getting more clear about like what you need, right? So let's say we've got one person who's just pretty clear, like they're feeling like they need to have sex once a day. And the other person's going like, I don't really want it that much, like once a week or once a month would be good for me. The invitation is to get curious about the motivations and beliefs that are underneath that. So when you find out from your partner what sex gives them, maybe you can understand that they don't actually need to like ejaculate or orgasm. They're looking for meaningful connection once a day from you. And so sometimes it's important to get clear about what the need is so that we can get more creative about what the strategies are. Sex is a strategy to achieve something. So what is it that you're both trying to achieve with sex as a strategy? And what other strategies can you use to achieve that thing that you're looking for, right? Giving each other more quality time, engaging in like sensual touch, other things, supporting each other to masturbate or like engage in sexual play in other ways. Like this is going to look so different for everyone, but try not to get caught up on frequency. It's not a great way to measure the success of your sex life. Like, great, yeah, we've had sex once a day. Like we're doing awesome. And maybe actually this would be a great question is like, how do we want to measure the success of our sex life? What does a successful sex life look and feel like to us? Does it mean people are orgasming? Does it mean we're exploring and learning new things and deliberately failing? Does it mean we're doing it a certain amount? Does it mean we're trying new and novel things, right? What does that look like for you? And also remember that any agreement that you come to is a living agreement, which means, let's say we decide we're going to try for a sex date twice a week. Um, I'm going to initiate one and my partner's going to initiate the other. Um, Try that for a month. See how it goes. See how it feels. Have another conversation. Touch base. Is it going well? Is it going as you planned? Do people feel like this is a big burden? Is it fun? Adjust as you need to, okay? And if you need more support getting into these conversations, then definitely reach out. So, last but not least, we're just going to talk about a few tips for keeping these conversations productive, and we'll just dive right in. So, the first is that when you are sharing what you need, what you want, what you need less of, remember to keep your comments focused in I statements and on statements about your body's experience. So, I noticed my body likes it when you do XYZ, or I noticed my body feels pressured or rushed by XYZ. Right? And I'm focusing on my body and my experience. I'm trying to explain my experience to my partner to have them understand. Try to avoid blaming language. You suck at massages, or if only you could just get better at. You are always come, and I don't feel like my pleasure matters. That kind of language sucks and it doesn't get you anywhere. Instead, you could be like, I feel sad when you ejaculate and then roll over, and I didn't even finish. Or I'd love for us to both learn how to touch each other's bodies with more intention. Maybe we could take a massage class together. Try to be factual in your observations and avoid hyperbole. So, the last 3 times we had sex, after you finished, you didn't check to see if I needed anything else is different than you never care how I feel, right? So, the way we word things can have a really big impact. And practice fertile listening, or what's called holding space. And you can literally do this just by setting a timer for like 5 minutes and let your partner answer the question. So I would ask my partner a question and give him 5 minutes to just think out loud to himself and answer the question. And I don't respond, I don't defend, I don't disagree, I don't agree. I just witness him as he processes the question out loud and shares. And what that allows him to do is think out loud and get more clear on his answer to the question. And it allows me to listen with really open ears and to avoid judging, defending, dismissing, and all the things that essentially invalidate our partner's experience. Practice paraphrasing. This one is huge. So before you say anything in response to something someone has said, say something like, let me make sure I understood that correctly, and then repeat what they said back to them in your own words. And then give them a chance to be like, yeah, you got me right, or no, that's not quite what I meant. Paraphrasing is a great way to slow the conversation down, for you to actually make sure you heard what they meant, and for them to feel validated and like you actually heard them before the conversation then moves on. And my last tip here is just really to dream, to think big picture, to think long term, to allow the conversation to be playful and silly, to be insightful, to be interesting, right? And I guess one last is just to give yourself the patience that conversation skills take time. And more than that, they take practice. And the example I'll give you is that my husband became a park ranger a couple years ago, and they had to do a lot of de-escalation training in order to have effective conversations with people who are camping who are not following the rules. And you do de-escalation, as in you avoid conflict by having effective communication with people before it gets to the conflict, or you disarm the conflict with words so that it doesn't get to the point where there's guns or violence or whatever being used. And so I would say that my husband's communication skills improved after the training, but they really improved after he had to use those skills 50 times a day in conversation after conversation after conversation. And he's now a annoying communication ninja, and it's time for me to really up-level my skills in our relationship. So have patience with yourselves as you practice these skills, and invest in practicing them. And that's why like learning a particular tool like holding space where you're deliberate about like setting a timer and listening to that person just gives you some structure for how you're going to have that conversation that allows you to be more effective. Okay. I hope that has provided you with some tools for starting a conversation about sexy times with your partner. If you want a little game that you can play together to practice your communication skills, then be sure to take the Solve Your Sex Drive quiz below, and I will see you soon. This is the part where we do the end bit, right? My friends, let's take a mindfulness minute here. Take a deep breath in. Open that mouth and let out a big, deep, full body sigh. Voila, your nervous system thanks you. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope that your head and your heart have something new to consider, something new to talk about, and something new to try. No husbands were harmed in the making of this podcast, and a big thank you to my husband for his help and original music composition. Love you, babe. This podcast was recorded on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and Convo Council in Whitehorse, Yukon. We acknowledge and are grateful to the original stewards of this land where we get to play, live, and raise our children. You can catch me on the Instagram at the Happy V Project for tips, tools, and anecdotes. And you can also join the weekly-ish newsletter for dispatches from my bedroom and my brain. Also, head to thehappyvaginaproject.com to learn more about how you can work with me. Catch you next time.